My name is Jan Harzan. I'm the Executive Director for MUFON. We are a scientific research organization that basically collects sighting reports from the public and then goes and investigates them. Our mission statement as an organization is the scientific study of UFOs for the benefit of humanity. And we have three primary goals. We investigate UFO reports, we promote research into the UFO subject, and we educate the public on our findings. MUFON is really more just left of center, where we try to take a scientific approach by collecting the data first off, and then reviewing the data, investigating the data, and making sure that what we're seeing is actually something that's truly an unknown. We have 3,000 members worldwide. Many scientists, physicists, PhDs, metallurgists, biologists, all the way down to just the average citizen who really wants to get involved. Some of those have chosen to become field investigators, and they go through our field investigative training courses. They become part of the team in their state or country where they reside, and they actually get engaged in going out and meeting this phenomena head on. We receive about 500 to 1,000 reports per month from around the world. Field investigators will take the case, generally review it, try to come up with a hypothesis, checking star charts, and we'll go put an investigation in place to determine what exactly happened. We've recently formed a science review board, and that board is made up of scientists from around the United States and around the world to review some of our more significant cases and try to render an opinion on them. What we'd like to do is be more outbound, more outspoken in terms of the really true UFO cases. So MUFON is moving forward with this approach, and we'll be publishing papers in these different areas to allow the general public and even the scientific community to be able to be challenged by what we're finding. That's the strength of MUFON as an organization, is being really the truth seekers of the UFO field.
Good evening. Our next speaker, Nancy Tertre, is a magna cum laude graduate at Princeton University and a published member of the Law Review of Pace Law School. She's owned and operated an award-winning health industry newspaper in New York, a printing company, and a 242-bed skilled nursing home. As an attorney, she practiced security litigation at a New York law firm for nearly a decade before taking over the U.S. operations of a family-owned French porcelain factory. Nancy was apprenticed to a famous psychic detective for nearly a decade and studied with numerous British, American, and Russian medical intuitives. Known as the skeptical psychic, Nancy is a practicing psychic detective working with law enforcement and victims' families. Medical intuitive, trained CRV remote viewer, and she's a paranormal investigator. Nancy is also trained and certified in intuitive Gestalt psychotherapy from the Soma Psych Institute in New York. Here to talk to how to talk to an alien, let me welcome to the stage Nancy Tertre.
Thank you to John for the introduction. My name is Nancy Tertre, and I'm going to be speaking about exolinguistics, how to talk to an alien. In terms of my background, I'm an attorney trained in securities litigation. I've run several businesses. I did a real quick detour in my life. I became a trained psychic detective. I trained for about a decade. I became a trained remote viewer. I'm certified and trained for a very long time in intuitive Gestalt psychotherapy. I'm a paranormal investigator. I've done a bunch of things. I really wasn't anticipating getting into ufology. It sort of happened, and so I think I've come in through this sort of through the back door. Yes, I've had many sightings. One of them I think was significant. It was what you all might call a mothership. It was the size of a football field floating in the sky that dematerialized and did a bunch of other things. I believe that I am the first practicing psychic to have been invited to speak before MUFON, so I'm very grateful for that. And I also believe that I'm the first person to speak on the topic of alien communication. So I'm quite pleased about all of that. Before I get into this real fast, and I am going to go very, very quickly, so hopefully you'll be able to keep up with me, and my apologies for that. Why is it important to learn about how to communicate with aliens? I can list a few things right off the bat. First of all, if they can shut down and start up our nuclear weapons systems in the US and in Russia, if they can violate our military and commercial airspace with impunity, if they can take our ordinary citizens, abduct them, and use them as guinea pigs, well then you already have quite a few really, really good reasons why we need to be able to communicate with them and figure out what their intentions are. The field of exopolitics, as you know, it's been around now for a while. I think it's great. It basically has to do with setting up a global strategy for dealing with visitors, and that's fantastic, except I think that, as you all know from the example in Washington right now, you don't have politics if you don't have communication. So that's why communication is the starting point, in my opinion. So if you had an alien who showed up from outer space and goes like this, what does it mean? And what it means depends on your frame of reference. If your frame of reference is World War II, this is going to mean victory. If your frame of reference is the Vietnam War, this is going to mean peace. And if you come from Britain and you flip it around, it's going to mean something else entirely. So most of you, you're familiar with the I-beam from Roswell, from the Roswell crash site debris. I would suggest, I've created a little, hypothetical I-beam, just so that we have a starting point for talking about this. So how would you interpret this little I-beam I created? Is it literal, figurative? Are you looking at these things collectively? Do they tell a story? Are they a map, like a star map? Or are they separate symbols? Or do they represent ideas? And what I would suggest to you, and you can come up with an awful lot of really creative interpretations, and I would suggest, if you read this in the way we normally read, from left to right, come on, all right, it's not coming up. Tech, I need some help, tech. Here we go. All right. Whoops, it's gone a little bit too far. But anyway, you could read it as ETs with horns have flown on a flying saucer in star galaxies from a planet like Saturn, which has mountains and running water, targeting Earth landing with intended victory. Right? Or, as we all know, these are really completely unrelated symbols for different car manufacturers here on Earth. But the idea is, you have to start thinking about, well, how do you interpret stuff that you don't know what it is? So do the alien symbols, do they represent ideograms, like ideas, pictograms, as in literal representations of things, alphabet letters, phonetic sounds, insignias, or do they represent numerical quantities of ideas? And as I showed down here on the bottom, there's the Chinese character for the word tea that you drink, but it's actually a conglomeration of 3 different symbols for grass, man, and tree. And you put them all together, and you create a different symbol. So do we do the same thing with alien symbols? I think a lot of people I know really, they want to jump to the really good stuff. The good stuff is the messages. You know, what are they telling us? How do we interpret what they're saying? And what I would suggest to you is slow down. We need to figure out what the language is, because that's how we're going to start to understand the messages. And you can get a variety of misinterpretations unless you understand the language. So what I'm calling exolinguistics here, exo meaning external, from the outside, or in this case off-world, linguistics, the study of language. And I'm going to tell you right off the bat, I'm going to be extremely politically incorrect. I'm going to say everything wrong. I'm going to use the word alien, not star visitors, intelligences, visitors, whatever. I'm going to say abduction, not contact, not experience. I'm going to say UFO, even if it's somewhat identifiable or not a craft. And I'm going to say psychic instead of intuitive or sensitive. So sorry in advance. All right, so my understanding is that you all at MUFON, you have spent the last half a century or so trying to get evidence of spacecraft and trying to figure out what constitutes the actual craft. And you do this by, in your scientific fashion, trying to get evidence, which is great. If you get crash site debris, fantastic. It's kind of difficult. If you get photographs, recordings, that's great. If you were able to get, I don't know, radioactive samples or movement in the earth from landing gear, that's also constitute evidence. And I think, and that's all hard evidence. Once you start to float into the soft evidence, which is eyewitness testimony, it begins to get a little squirrely. Nobody likes eyewitness testimony. And the problem is, when you're dealing with language, you are dealing almost strictly with people, subjective content, soft evidence. And I'm going to suggest to you there's a way to deal with it. And that is that we create a Rosetta Stone equivalent for alien languages. And I don't know if you remember, but 1799, the Napoleonic armies came through Egypt, and they found this stone, and it had a governmental edict in which the same thing was written 3 different ways, in Egyptian hieroglyphics, in Greek, and Demotic Egyptian script. They finally figured out what the Egyptian hieroglyphics meant because they were able to compare it, or I'm going to say triangulate, because that's really what you all do. If you're dealing with eyewitness testimony from 3 different people, and you're trying to figure out a very specific location of a craft in the sky, you triangulate. So you are not specifically relying on the evidence of any one witness. I believe there are about 10 ways that aliens communicate with us. There are probably more, but this is the basic categories I think you have. You have audible speech or sounds, telepathy, electronic manipulation of sounds, crop circles, dreams, channeling, remote viewing, technological devices such as implants, mental downloads, UFO spacecraft responses, and body language. And I'm going to try and get through as many of them as I, as I possibly can. All right, so first question, can aliens talk? Because if you can't really have a language unless you figure out whether they can talk. So you need all kinds of necessary anatomical equipment. You need mouth, larynx, vocal cords, lungs, probably a nose, maybe some ears. So the question is, do they have that stuff? And in order to answer that, you have to know how many species or races of aliens are we dealing with. So that leads you to a different question. I have read in the course of my research that there are anywhere from 4 to 82 species. Recently, I saw a number up at 160. I know the Honorable Paul Hellyer, former Defense Minister of Canada, just told us outside that he'd understood that there are between 2 and 12. It's quite a bit, anyway. And if they're all different, do they all have different anatomy? And I would suggest to you, yes, they do. And the basics, I think, that everybody kind of agrees on, these are not places of origin, these are species types. Insectoids, reptilians, humanoids, hybrids, grays, small, large, light beings. I think that's sort of a basic group. And if you look at them, you can't necessarily expect that they're going to be some kind of a mirror image of a human. So for example, with the mantis type of aliens, the insectoid types, if they're anything like our little insect praying mantises here on Earth, well, if you're going to look at them, they're not going to have any ears. A praying mantis here on Earth has its ears in its abdomen or its thorax. Crickets have their ears in their forelegs. Some frogs have their ears on the interior, in their lungs. They're hearing vibrations. So you won't necessarily see that piece of that anatomy. Now, a lot of the grays are commonly described as having either no mouth or a little slit for a mouth. They've got 2 holes for a nose, maybe a tiny little bump, but not much. To me, this suggests they're vestigial types of organs. Maybe they're still used a little bit, but not too much, probably because they don't need to use them. Now, once you get into the humanoids, hybrids, and time travelers, then you are talking about beings that look like us. So they seem to have all the equipment, at least on the exterior. I have on the top left here is a photo of 3 alleged aliens from planet Venus. The photo was taken in 1957 at the home of Howard Mangus, who was a contactee in New Jersey. This comes from a stranger in the Pentagon. And I have read, anyway, that Commander Thor over there on the right side of that picture had only 1 lung. Well, you wouldn't know it to look at him. On the right-hand side, there's a photo of a humanoid giant alien whose name was Kenya, who was somewhere between 8 to 9 feet tall. And he was part of the group of aliens who were encountered in what was known as the W56 friendship case in Italy. They were living in a 200-mile-long base on the coast of Italy beneath the Adriatic Sea. Aliens can also communicate through electronic speech. I have been the recipient of some of that. I'm not going to go into it. If you want to read about it, you can certainly read about it in my book, How to Talk to an Alien. The Italian engineer Stefano Breccia, he wrote Mass Contacts, and he wrote about the W56 friendship case. He said that the aliens would be able to target, in a room full of TV sets, they could target one specific TV set and choose that one to communicate through. They also used some of the early prototype computers in the 1950s. The friendship case went on for close to 40 years. There's 40 years of contact with local residents and then very high-level industrialists and business people. So it was quite an interesting case. On the right-hand side, you have a very early photo. Young John Keel, who was a well-known ufologist, wrote the Mothman Prophecies. And he got so many electronic types of phone calls, bizarre ones, he labeled it telephony or telephony, depending on how you pronounce that. I want to talk a little bit about nonverbal communication. Language is only a subset of communication, okay? So there are many other ways you can communicate beyond that. I have read cases where the aliens were unable to communicate in any language, so they used body language, charades, which is what we would do if we encountered someone from a country and neither one of us spoke the same language. Dream communication. I have been contacted this way. I'm a lucid dreamer. I'm not going to go into it again. I have written about it if you're interested. But that's another way in which you can get actually quite good information. Synchronicity or timing. Now for this you have to take it a step further because you have to understand they have certain mind control techniques. You can be led to certain places at certain times to be in contact with certain people, and it can be orchestrated. That orchestration is, in and of itself, a certain type of a communication. Crop circles. I have interviewed people many years ago who were involved in making them, and they were a little disappointed that it wasn't the aliens making them, but then they discovered that they were being guided through what they believed were alien forces. There's a lot of information being conveyed through the crop circles, as you all probably know. This one in particular, there's a Canadian astrophysicist, Mike Reed, who found that this is actually a pictorial representation of the first 10 digits of the number pi, including the little dot, which represents the rounding up appropriately. Now, what was odd was 2 days ago, my dear friend Doris, who actually came here with me, decided to bring up a crop circle. She and I never talked about crop circles. And the more she discussed it, she said she had a strange experience. She played a music box and suddenly zoomed out on it and looked at it in a sort of three-dimensional spiral form and realized that this crop circle was a form of communication through a binary code of music. Now, the fact that I put this into my presentation and she brings it up 2 days earlier, that's a form of a synchronicity. That's a communication. A lot of you are familiar with it's the CE5 protocols. You go out, you sit in a desert, you flash some lights, maybe you play some music, and you meditate and you try and call in the craft. That actually works. I've done that. I've seen one of the most extraordinary flashes of light in the sky that I've ever seen. It was huge. I know lots of other people who have been very successful at that also. That's communication. Then you have neurohacking, implants in the human body. There was a Florida contactee, Filberto Cardenas. He claimed that aliens had actually put 2 implants behind his ears, and once they did that, he was able to see their communications in 3D. And he could also feel, he could feel heat and cold and smell and all kind of thing. The late Dr. Roger Leir, I interviewed him on my old CBS radio show called Hot Leads, Cold Cases. He was, as you all know, a pioneer in the field of surgical removal of alien implants. He told me that some of the implants that he had removed actually were emitting radio frequencies, which suggests that if they're emitting, they're capable of transmitting or receiving types of communication. So that's another way. Okay, I want to get to alien language. So what are we talking about with alien language? You have alien languages and you have human languages. And how would you know the difference? So would an alien language even sound human? And that also kind of assumes that we're sharing a similar type of anatomy. Maybe we're in the cases where we're not. They don't. They've been described several different ways. Now imagine when you listen to these, trying to translate these, all right? Some of them have been described. Whoops. I gotta go back. No. How do I get back? Back arrow, back arrow. All right. Okay, did you catch that? All right, here's another one. Now, maybe if you have some dogs, maybe you speak a little dog, but that's still kind of tough to get the exact translation off of. All right, next one. All right, Charles Hall described the tall whites as communicating, sounding like meadowlarks. They have been described as sounding like birds before. Again, kind of difficult to translate. Give me a second here. All right, this is interesting to me. Now, this is an untranslated recording. This was made by a contactee. She's had abductions since she was very, very young. Her name is OSEAANA December. They are basically reptilian types. She was having some type of a lucid dream, and she was saying to them in her dream, "I'd like to learn your language." And they said, "No, it's too difficult. You're never going to be able to learn it." She said, "Please, please, please." One of them finally said, "Okay, we'll teach it to you." And I want you, when you're listening to this, I want you to listen, remember it, because I'm going to play something right afterwards that I want you to compare it to. And I am going to skip ahead a little bit on this. All right, I'm going to jump ahead here if I can. I can't see. It's not doing what I want it to do. Okay, that's good enough. Unfortunately, this monitor's not allowing me to skip ahead to where I wanted to, but oops, you get the general idea. Now, this fellow here, he's a British man, Bernard Byron, and he, you'll see in this clip here, he's being interviewed by the late Sir Patrick Moore, who actually was one of Britain's greatest astronomers. He was influential in the Soviet space program and apparently also in ours. The fact that he's taken the time out to interview this guy is extremely interesting to me. This guy claims to be speaking the language from the planet Venus. And I want you to listen to it, to compare it, and also pay attention to the fact that he is able to translate this. He is translating from alien to English, and he's doing that in a couple of different languages, and then he is writing them. It's quite extraordinary because most people who are speaking these languages don't have the capacity to translate them or interpret them.
What does that mean, actually?
That means, how are all you? I am very pleased to see you this afternoon.
How many languages can you speak?
I can speak altogether 3 of the space languages. One is Venusian, the second is Kruger, the planet Kruger 60b, and Pluto.
What about Plutonian? What does that sound like?
Plutonian is what does that mean?
How did you learn these languages?
These languages have been a gift sent from me from the actual people by rays. And even at this moment, although you cannot see them, they are sending these rays down to help me.
By some mental process or some mechanical process?
No, it's by some mechanical process. But apart from this, I can't tell you how it's done.
What about Martian?
Martian, I don't know much about their language. Although I've heard so much about them, I've never been in contact with them.
You haven't actually been to any other planets yourself?
No, not yet.
Who drew that picture, did you?
No, a lady done this for me, of the name of Mrs. Giel.
And where do these people actually come from?
They come from the second planet from the sun Kruger, 60b.
So in addition to speaking these languages, I believe you can also write them. This is correct?
Yes, I can write these languages.
Could we see an example of their writing, do you think?
Yes, certainly.
What does that mean, actually?
This here means that we are here for a purpose, which is something to do with your Earth. That we will reveal later.
I see. Could we see some Plutonian writing, do you think?
Certainly.
What does that mean, actually?
This means, now they have written this here, a message to you. Before long, in 1969, we are going to show you proof. Patrick, they call you. Did you mind this here?
Not at all, no,
Patrick.
far from it now.
We have we have watched you for a long time. We are interested in all your great men besides ordinary people. We are interested in everyone.
That's most encouraging, because Venus... Mr. Bernard Byron from Essex moves in a realm of the unknown, which, I think you'll agree, makes it very difficult for us to disprove him.
All right. So that was, from my point of view, very, very interesting. The similarities between the reptilian language and his Venusian language. Rather fascinating. You might start to build up your Rosetta Stone that way. Another way that aliens can speak is they can actually hijack our vocal cords. I have been a witness to this. Again, I've written about it in my book. I'm not going to talk about it here. If you're interested, please take a look. So that they can speak a number of different languages that way. I will give you the example of the famous Betty Andreasen-Luca case. She was abducted, and when the aliens showed up in her house, they put her family in a state of suspended animation, and she was abducted, basically. Ray Fowler, who I think was MUFON's former director of scientific research, who I spoke with and said to say hello to everybody, he wrote several books about her, including the Andreasen affair, and he basically wrote down all the different hypnotic regression sessions. This was one of them. And she was responding normally to the people who were questioning her, and then all of a sudden didn't. She said her hands and her feet became very numb and heavy. She couldn't move them, which was similar to what she had experienced during the abduction. And pretty soon her entire demeanor changed, and she stopped responding to the questions. And she started speaking in this kind of strange language, which Ray tried to put into a phonetic rendition, which is this. I'll try it. She says, "Oh, tukfara, bo fitfata, ma hufala, defi ma her, defi okat turferhat, naralaha," and on. I can't do it. Anyway, so one of the questioners, Fred, says, "Betty, what are you saying to us?" And Betty says, "I'm just saying it. I don't know what they're saying to you." Now, she clearly was not taking ownership of that language. You could argue that as somebody who had a fundamentalist Christian background, maybe she believed in speaking in tongues, and maybe that's what she was doing. Or you could look at this as absolute, complete nonsense. Doesn't mean anything to anybody. However, several years later, it was found that that language was translatable into not just one, but two semi-dead languages, Gaelic and Latin. And the linguist Leonard Keane was able to translate part of that into this message, which begins to sound an awful lot like some of the alien messages that we have heard. So it translates into, "The living descendants of the northern peoples are groping in universal darkness. Their mother mourns. A dark occasion forebodes when weakness in high places will revive a high cost of living, an interval of mistakes in high places, an interval fit for distressing events." So I think that brings up another question, which is speech. In order for it to be true speech, does it have to be meaningful? And if so, to whom? That might seem like a crazy question. I don't think so. As a psychic medium, what happens a lot of the time when you're delivering a reading to someone, you're essentially reading a sort of alien type of symbolic language. I often feel very silly because I'll say things, they mean absolutely nothing to me. And yet, whoever I am speaking to, suddenly they'll break out crying or laughing, or they'll have a very specific reaction to whatever's being said. So it doesn't mean anything to me. So that brings up, I would say, 4 categories of what I would call nonsense languages. All right, and I'm just going to run through them really quickly here. You have the first one called glossomania, otherwise known as clanging. It's what schizophrenics do. It's compulsive rhyming or alliteration. So they might say something like tapatipitapa tapatap. Okay, it doesn't mean anything. And what I wrote here in red it means nothing to the speaker, and it means nothing to the listener. So I did a little asterisk here, put it down below. That's the shorthand, pretty much insane. That's the insane category. Glossolalia gets a little bit more interesting. The definition is fabricated and non-meaningful speech, especially such speech associated with trance state and schizophrenic syndromes. All right, in this case, means something to the speaker, means nothing to the listener. Okay? So it could be my little personal private language, which is great, but probably falls into the insane category, maybe. Third one is called xenoglossy. Now this is where it gets really interesting. The definition is the putative paranormal phenomenon in which a person is able to speak or write a language he or she could not have acquired by natural means. Okay, the late Dr. Ian Stevenson was a psychiatrist at UVA Medical School. He researched this field of xenoglossy for decades. he put together cases of thousands of people who were able to basically speak languages which they had no ability to have known, okay? And so you might have a housewife who's suddenly speaking Swedish or German or Bengali and never had any access. And he researched them very, very thoroughly. For him, they were what he called suggestive of reincarnation. In other words, they'd probably learned them in a previous life. Sometimes verified because sometimes they'd speak in archaic words that modern language no longer used. But a lot of, and their grammar wasn't perfect, and sometimes they made mistakes, but still they were speaking in a language that they didn't know. So si je commençais à parler comme ça, je ne savais pas que je parlais en français. Now, let's suppose I didn't speak any French. Any of you out there who speak any French, that would mean something to you. Doesn't mean anything to me, because I don't speak French. Well, yes, I do, but you get the idea. So it means nothing to the speaker, but it means something to the listener. That category falls into the paranormal. And then the last one, speaking in tongues, that's sort of the religious category. And you get that, you know, the Pentecostals from the day of the Pentecost, where from the New Testament, where the apostles were filled with the Holy Spirit. They go running out in the streets, and they're all talking the language of the Spirit. And everybody out there understands them and hears them in their own native language. So in that case, it means something to the speaker and the listener, but there's no common language. So I wanted to give you just a little flavor of some speaking in tongues, just so you can get it. Now, this particular sample that I'm going to play seems to my ear that there's a little bit of clanging going on, alliteration, okay? And then there's also something that begins to sound like, you know, real language, but it's not recognizable. Okay, you get the basic idea on that. Now I want you, oops. All right, this is a light language spoken by a woman. She's from Greece. Her name is Tatiana Remiliati. This is Isemic. She doesn't know what it means. In fact, she was quite curious about a particular word she kept repeating it was nakiet. She doesn't know what it means. Take a listen to see what this sounds like.
Atech, zavantai nokich, ultaminia naket, zavditulin el mastela, viniana suthionki, inye eliat aterich, svansa se ola sal, ultulin kinarati, naket.
Okay, so I thought it would be a really good idea. Somebody I know, a contactee, his name is Eric Hope. He began speaking and writing in a strange alien language after he was abducted in 1987. I asked him if he thought he'd be able to translate something written in English into this alien language that he seems to speak. And he said, yeah, he thought he could do it. So I said, well, what do you want to translate? And he said, well, I have the Viking prayer for the dead up. How about that? Now, I thought that was interesting. I took that one away. The Viking reference was curious. I said, no, let's do the Lord's Prayer, because that I can get translated in many, many different languages, and we can again start to make some comparisons here to see if your language is related to any human language that's out there. What I'm going to play for you, you're going to see, I asked him to say the word stop, and that's at the end of every sentence, so there's a direct, almost word-to-word correlation, or at least sentence-to-sentence correlation. You're also going to hear some strange noise in the computer. I seem to get a lot of strange electronic interference in my machines. It sort of goes wah, wah, wah. Just ignore it. It is what it is. Take a listen. Oops.
This is the Lord's Prayer in the strange language. Arianda hut nach heen, stop. Triangulatee, stop. Darinarod, stop. Derinati, stop. Dorunapiranati, stop. Diranmurmini, Krinareti, stop. Dabruan Madridarachko, stop. Darita Otora Matia Stan, stop. Parina Nat Dunatirna, stop. Pariara tu Ukraina, stop. Ordani Dorona, stop. Tadaru Kirina, stop. Paruna Kirina Ratish, stop. That's it.
Let me ask you a quick question. Now, what you're speaking, all right, which sounds consistent with the way that I've always heard you speak this language, do you see that as being, is that reflected in the written language that you do? Is that the same language, or is that something different?
I mean, your guess is as good as mine. I think it's the same.
Okay.
I mean, I didn't write that language until after October 3rd, 1987.
Right.
And I didn't speak this before that incident.
And nobody that you know speaks this or writes this?
Not that I know of, no.
Do you ever speak it with anybody, just to test them?
Yeah, well, I remember around 87 or 88, I think it was still 87. I was working as a sales clerk at a little store on Lower Broadway called Star Magic. And I remember a guy from Brazil came in, and he was apparently a famous musician down in Brazil. And he had, a couple of women, who were his fans following him around. And, the store sold, quartz crystals and plasma globes and telescopes and stuff. And we started talking, and there's an area in Brazil that's like a UFO hotspot. And we ended up going out to lunch, and, I told him about the language that I had started speaking. And so he wanted to hear it. So I spoke it to him, and he looked me dead in the eye and he said, "Would it surprise you if I told you I have heard extraterrestrials in the jungles of Brazil speaking this language?"
To which you responded?
I was pretty surprised. I was like, "Oh, really?" Apparently, there's an entrance to an elevator in.
Oh no! Oh no! 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 How do I get back to it? I better not start over again. All right, well, I'm not going to go. He says there's an entrance with an elevator in Brazil to an alien base. And he says humans basically can't get in because we would give them some type of bacterial or viral infections. So anyway, so I'm listening to this language, and a couple of things occurred to me. First of all, since he brought up Brazil, I immediately got on the phone with a friend of mine who's from Brazil, and I said, "Is this Portuguese or anything related to Portuguese?" And she said, "No." She said, "But to her, it sounded very, very similar to a language spoken by the Tupi-Guarani tribes in very remote areas of Brazil along the Amazon." So I was able online to actually hear some of that language. It's similar, it's not identical. I then went with my first impulse, which was, could this be related to some type of Scandinavian language, since he had brought up this Viking thing? So what I did is I was actually able, and this is a miracle, I was able to find the Lord's Prayer spoken in Old Norse, which is a dead language, okay? And I want you to listen to it, And you'll see I've got it written here, and I also have it written in the old, it's called Futhark runic writing. And you figure this was written just before the time of Christ, about 100 BC. So, whoops. Take a listen to it. Why is this not playing? It's not playing. I need tech. Ugh. Nope. Tech, can anybody come out here and make this thing, make it play? All right, well, if they can't, they can't. You'll see basically what if you could have heard it, you would have seen it's actually very, very similar to some of these strange Scandinavian languages, including Icelandic. They have some issues with some of its origins, but because I have also a background in German, I can recognize certain German roots in some of the words. And I do not recognize German roots in Eric's language. So to me, it is different. However, keep your eye on that Futhark runic character writing, because it's going to come up later, okay? So can aliens speak human languages? That's the next question. Well, if you showed up in a spaceship and you land on Earth, you're going to want to communicate with whoever is going to be showing up, or as efficiently as possible. You've got 7 billion human beings, and we're speaking 7,000 different languages. Your best shot is going to be English, because as this map shows, countries in blue is where English is either a first language, second language, or the first foreign language, and only the ones in orange are where it is not even a first foreign language. So you have a good shot with English. However, if you only want to speak with people in their native language, your best shot is going to be Mandarin Chinese, because that's what the most number of native speakers are, followed by Spanish. English is third, followed by Arabic and Hindi. But let's suppose that you had already landed on Earth maybe several thousand years ago, let's say somewhere between 3,000 and 1,000 BC. You might be speaking some form of ancient Sumerian, archaic Egyptian, Paleo-Hebrew, or Ge'ez. It really depends. My research indicates that in general, many but not all species of aliens are polyglots, meaning they speak several languages, some of them alien and human both. So I want to talk a little bit about telepathy, because everybody always talks about telepathy when they're talking about alien experiences. Okay. David Jacobs, who's done a lot of alien abduction research, was pretty straightforward when he said, here, I'll quote him, "During the entire abduction experience, communication between aliens and abductees is telepathic. Period, end of story." He believes that all abductions, all communication is telepathic, whether it is between alien to alien, alien to human, or human to human. And then once the humans get returned back to Earth, well, we all know they're not telepathic, so it goes back to audible. And I would respectfully beg to differ with him for a number of reasons. First of all, I've got here 10 well-known cases in which the abductees claimed that they were communicated with not only telepathically, but also in audible speech. Second of all, speaking as a trained psychic medium, I was not psychic before, I've trained into it. Bless you. I know that you can do this. It's a natural human trait, and I wrote a book explaining why and how in terms of neuroscience, psychology, and linguistics. So for those and many other reasons, I would disagree. However, there may be reasons why aliens prefer telepathy. As I suggested early on, it may be that they have inadequate anatomy to handle audible speech. Telepathy really encompasses long-distance communication, much longer than sound waves, so it's efficient that way. Third, it may just be a more evolved form of communication by more evolved species. Or fourth, it may be a style of communication, what I would call the one-mind species, in which the individual members tend to operate as part of a unit or a group with other members, and so it's more efficient to communicate telepathically. And I think a question that nobody ever really asks is, does telepathy have a language? When you get something telepathically, how do you know? And the answer is there's several ways. It could be communicated absolutely juxtaposed as a thought on brain immediately. It could be sent as visual images. It could be sent as alien language, and it could be sent as human language. And that sort of brings up another question, which is all telepathy perfect, unlike audible speech? And the answer is no. You can make mistakes telepathically in alien language and human language. So here's an example of a mistake in alien language. This was the very famous case of Herbert Schumer, police sergeant in Nebraska in 1967. He sees a landed craft, he gets a tour of the craft by his alien guide, and 4 occasions his alien guide starts to communicate telepathically. But he doesn't understand him. It's all like garbled stuff. So the alien stops, and then he begins to speak, but in this sort of pidgin English, really simple stuff. So Shermer said, I felt like I was getting more input of something that I couldn't understand. And then he, meaning the alien, says, "Watchman, come with me." Okay? You can also have imperfect telepathy in human language. In this case, it was in English, and I'm going to go back to the Betty Andreasson case. So they show up, they're in our house, the family's in suspended animation, and they say something telepathically like, "We'd like some burnt meat." And she's saying, "Sure, I'll go cook some." So she's over the stove, she's starting to cook it up, it's starting to burn, and the aliens are getting all agitated, and they're saying, no. Something like, "We want meaty information that has withstood the fires of time." So she says, "Oh, okay, so you want knowledge tried by fire." And then she has to think about it, and what does that mean? And she said, the only thing she can think of is her Bible. So she hands them her Bible, and that's what they wanted. So the language went from burnt meat to Bible, and that was in English. All right, I want to talk about written language now also, and this is a big category. Bud Hopkins, researcher, I'm going to play a clip that was actually made by his ex-wife, Carol Rainey. It was part of a series. She actually caught a lot of flack for this because she was somewhat critical of his research techniques in this, and I'm not going to get into that, but I do think it's interesting because he basically suggests that there is really only one authentic style of alien writing. Oops. I got to see how to play this. It's not playing. Oh, here we go. Here we go. Got it.
Well, really what I want to do is have you go through some of that material as it comes out.
Okay. Right.
And,
okay.
And
yeah. Do I look at you or into the camera?
No, me.
Okay.
Today was a shoot that I was excited to finally be doing.
Okay.
Bud had offered to go on camera for the first time with evidence that he believed clearly demonstrated the reality of the alien abduction phenomenon.
Okay, over the years I've been collecting symbols, drawings that I have people make when they say that they remember having seen some kind of notational system, symbols or whatever, inside the craft on some surface or other.
There's a board up there that looks like somebody's been writing on it.
A board. Mm-hmm. Does it have symbols, letters, numbers? What does it look like to you?
And I make them draw these for me afterwards. I have kept them absolutely secret. The reason that I've never reproduced these in any source or never presented them publicly until this moment is because it's always been something that I could hold back along with many other details to be able to test the veracity of people who come forward. It's an old police technique. To look at this little book which I put together a number of years ago. Very crucially, this was one of the early sets I got in 1983 from Debbie Jordan, who I wrote about in Intruders. Now, she said they were arranged vertically like this. She felt that they were read downward. She didn't know why. She has no idea what they mean. This woman from Canada made this drawing. She felt that this was exactly what she had seen inside a ship, inside a UFO during an abduction. And she has no idea, as none of these people do, what any of this means. Nobody, and that's an item, of course, of credibility in their favor, that they're not trying to interpret it and say this is a star map or this is a whatever. So she said that this was precisely what she saw. And you can see from the way these begin to mass out on a page how similar they are. This is another New York City abductee who separated them out. Another woman who was an artist made this drawing very, very quickly. She drew it on a large scale, but when reduced, they all end up looking extremely similar. Now this over here is Linda's.
I saw the symbols up in the craft. Oh, that was scary.
Why is that scary?
Because that was confirmation for what I'd seen up in the craft. I wasn't the only one that saw these symbols.
And when she drew it for me, after a hypnosis session, she remembered seeing these. She started drawing here, and she went down the page, trying to remember exactly what they looked like. She said this wasn't exactly right. She finally got down here. When she put this dot in, she thought, yeah, that's the closest of these curves to what the thing actually looked like that she saw.
The big question to me is, what does this signify?
Now, Linda, in this particular case, the only way that she can be attacked, the case can be attacked, is of course if people say she's a liar, a hoaxer, she's hired all these people, every one of these people is an actress or actor that she's hired, she's trained her son, etc., etc. Well, if that's the case, Linda came up with symbols here that are virtually identical to the symbols of many, 30, 40, 50 other people. Now that establishes, as far as I'm concerned, her credibility. This has never, until this moment, been made public.
Okay, I'm going to stop it there. I am also going to respectfully disagree with Bud Hopkins. My research has shown that there are actually many different alien writing styles, alphabets, and symbols. The only person I know who seriously has researched this is the late Dr. Mario Pezziglini, who was a Delaware psychiatrist. He basically came up with three main styles of alien writing, which he called geometric, cursive, and dot and line, and I'm going to show you some samples of those. He also came up with 4 basic types of alphabets: alphabetic, syllabic, ideographic, and symbolic. These are the basic, just to give you some examples of the geometric, cursive, and dot and line styles. So the question is, how do you get alien writing? Where do you get it from? There are really only 3 ways. Either you get it during some type of contact experience, or some crash site debris, so all that's kind of tough to hang on to or to get. More commonly is through recollections of memories of abductees, contactees, and then finally you get into that really squirrely area that nobody likes to deal with, channeled alien writing, which is going to involve psychic channeling, automatic writing, or dream language. So I'm going to run through each one of these as quickly as I can. Actual artifacts. Well, here's a really cool one. You will recognize this as being in the dot and line style that Dr. Pezziglini talked about. This was a letter written on some strange piece of material that was allegedly dropped out of a UFO that was taking off. It was retrieved in 1965 by the contactee James Reeves, and he told the media about it. He turned it over to the military. The military, of course, never gave it back to him. They gave him some watered-down copy. I'm not quite sure how this resurfaced, but it resurfaced courtesy of the editor of Skyships Over Cashiers. Now, what's interesting to me is that if you squint your eyes, it begins to look an awful lot like the Old Norse Futhark runic writing, which was around the time of Christ. I want to show you some memories. Okay, this falls in the categories of memories of alien writing. There's a famous case, Antonio Villas-Boas, the Brazilian farmer who gets abducted and has a very long experience, but he does recall seeing this particular insignia, also in the dot and line style. that was written over the interior of a doorway inside the spacecraft. He tried to walk out with an actual artifact. I think it was like a clock, but they caught him red-handed, and they made him give it back. So this is all he had in the way of a memory. Now you have in 1964, the famous case, police officer Lonnie Zamora, he sees a landed UFO, and he draws it over here on the right-hand side. It's a red insignia on the exterior of the spacecraft. Seems to me the UFO casebook artist rendering is a little bit different. It looks a little bit like my friend's Lincoln Town Car, but a little different. Now this is a case, this is 1975, two little 7-year-old Japanese kids, they see a landed spacecraft, the alien comes out, and in their memory of this, they remember seeing this inscription on the exterior of the spacecraft. Now, looking at this as a Westerner, you sort of automatically say, oh yeah, that looks like it's Japanese. They're seeing it through the filter of their own language. So of course I got in touch with some professors in Japan, and they said, no, this has nothing to do with Japanese. This is not Japanese. And again, squint your eyes at this a little bit, it begins to look a little bit like the dot and line style that we're talking about. Now if you go to the famous Roswell I-beam that had the sort of purplish engraved, what Dr. Jesse Marcel Jr. called hieroglyphics. I'm not sure they were really hieroglyphics, but to him that's what he called them. They're unusual to me because I haven't really seen anything else that quite like them, and I'm wondering if it's the fact that they're engraved that gave them sort of a thickness, like a 3D effect. But if you start to interpret them, you got to look at them. Whoops. Okay. Look at them creatively. So, over on the top left, I have different spin states for a hydrogen atom. And they seem awfully similar. Now, maybe that could be some reference to the type of energy that was propelling that craft, possibly. Okay? You go over on the right-hand side, and I have a channeled symbol. That was channeled by Steve Reichmuth, under hypnosis by Mary Barr, who is a hypnotherapist who's come out of Los Alamos. He says that it represents an exclamation or it's an emphasis point. Well, check out in the Roswell I-beam down at the bottom, the second symbol over from the left-hand side. Looks awfully similar to me. All right, now I want to get to channeled alien writing. Not only do people get squirrely on the fact that they think that you're crazy if you're speaking strange nonsense languages, but once they get comfortable with that, then they worry about, well, who's actually sending the message? Are they angels, demons, or aliens? And I'm going to leave that. I do discuss it again in my book. I'm not going to go there, but I think by and large it's a matter of semantics. One of the earliest creators of an angelic language was the mathematician John Dee. He was the astrologer to Queen Elizabeth I. In the 16th century. He was praying up in his tower, an angel floats up to the second story and hands him a smoky quartz crystal. And after that contact, he begins to create this alphabetic language, which is delivered to him in light. He traces it on the paper. It's a golden light. It's also given to him backwards because apparently it's so powerful in its vibrational signature that it would be too much if it were delivered in its forward state. And in fact, it was similar languages or alphabets were adopted by lots of secret societies who were eager to capture that power, such as the Knights Templar, the Freemasons, the Rosicrucians. What I did is I was looking on the FBI site, and I was looking at bank robbery notes. And if you look at the one on the left-hand side, that's what the FBI calls a naturally prepared banknote. And you can see that all the writing lines up, it's smooth, consistent, same slant and all that. You look at the other one on the right-hand side, and that's called distorted writing, because it's kind of wobbly, it looks funny. To me, it looks like it's written by somebody who's in their non-dominant hand. So my point here is that you can have the same alphabet, two completely different handwriting styles. We know it's the same letter, but if you just looked at it, it actually looks quite different. So here's what I did. I compared John Dee, his alphabet, to channeled Martian writing by a 19th century French medium. His name was Helene Smith. She claimed to have visited Mars and said she spoke Martian language. And what I did is I circled the letters that are extremely similar. You know, you might even say they're identical, except maybe the differences are they're written in slightly different styles of handwriting. Hers is a little bit more wobbly. This is how you start to create your Rosetta Stone. Here's another one. Now this is in the script style. Over on the left-hand side is a letter that came out of the W56 friendship case, allegedly written by an alien. On the other side is channeled alien writing by OSEAANA December, which she calls the Lasaya aliens. Again, I circled all the similar characters. It's extraordinary to me. So you're building one, and maybe one alphabet or the other is larger, so you wouldn't capture all of the characters. But what you're starting to be able to do is to build similarities in context. What I did here is, you can see the two little boxes contain channeled alien writing. In the background is the 17th century Mi'kmaq First Nations hieroglyphics, okay? It's a logographic system. They're very, very similar. They're not identical. You could see that, but they share a similar flavor. These might maybe fall into more of the geometric category. Okay, the fellow Eric Hope, who you listened to before, he also does writing. Now, when he writes from left to right. So he did that for me, and he gave it to me on a vertical sheet of paper. To me, it looked awfully Chinese. So I immediately got in touch with a friend of mine who's a professor of Chinese and English, and I said, "Is this Chinese?" And she said, "No, not at all." Then she flipped it over sideways, which is how you see it right here, and she said, "But it looks awfully Middle Eastern to me." And in many respects, it does. It's not identical, you could see that, but it has some of that flavor. There's a similarity to that. Here's a different example. This is the South Arabian Sabaean alphabet that was written in 500 BC, okay? And two examples of channeled alien writing. All three of them share extremely similar characteristics. I think it's interesting, the founder of Mormonism, Joseph Smith, he encountered an angel. The angel told him where to find the golden plates. The golden plates had some strange writing on them. He was told to translate them, which he did. That became the Book of Mormon. But that strange writing that was on them is in this piece of paper that I'm showing you right here. This is referred to in the Book of Mormon as Reformed Egyptian. Looks a little bit like Egyptian, but it's not Egyptian. So why are they writing in Reformed Egyptian? Why do many of these written languages look reformed but not identical? What I would suggest to you is it has to do with the evolution of language. Over time and different types of locations, language will evolve and it will change. One of my favorite examples is a little island in the South Pacific called Pitcairn. It's where there was the Mutiny of the Bounty, and Fletcher Christian in 1789 takes his mutineers and they all go and populate this little island called Pitcairn. Well, nobody shows up for centuries because it's so isolated. Meanwhile, you have America and England and Australia, everywhere else, we're continuing to speak English. You go back there today, they're speaking Shakespearean English. And what I would suggest to you is that aliens, if they have been here before, gone away, come back, we've evolved in our languages, they've evolved in whatever the languages are, so they're not identical. So what you have to start doing is looking for root similarities. And I think that once we do that, we may actually, through language, be able to support some of the ancient alien theories that they're talking about. I would suggest for exolinguistics a new definition of language, that language is the expression of symbols that can be used by one entity to evoke an accurate interpretation by another entity. And if I have enough time here, I'm going to quickly talk about alien messages, the kinds of things through language we could start to learn about. Angela Smith, working with C.B. Scott Jones, has been working on a book called Voices of the Cosmos. She's been in a trance state asking questions to different species of aliens to find out what do they breathe, eat, their emotions, time, stuff like that. We can learn about alien beings. We can learn about the future of our planet, our global crossroads, many of the things that a lot of abductees come back and talk about. We can learn about outer space, the same way Betty Hill showed us about a star that we didn't know about until years later. We can learn about our human history, genetic changes, DNA, in this, the 4-year study conducted, or work being done by Mary Barr and Steve Reichmuth in Aliens Answer. She puts them into a trance state, and they have categories of questions that she asks about to a particular group of aliens. Over here on the top right-hand side, you see Lasaya alien technical writing. If we can learn how to translate the technical writing, we can learn about the technology. And finally, we can learn about multidimensions, consciousness, metaphysics, such as Jill Maher has written a book called Keys to Soul Evolution, in which it's basically a monologue by a collective of aliens who talk about metaphysical things. These, by the way, are 2 pictures of me. The one on the left is me with high cheekbones and a hump nose and a red mustache, none of which I've ever had. That was during a paranormal investigation. The other one is me during a different paranormal investigation where I have a translucent head and a woman's face coming out of my neck. I'd love to know what that's about. Anyway, thank you very much. And if any of you happen to have samples of alien speech or writing, I'm very, very interested. I'd love to talk to you, take a look at them. You can reach me here, and appreciate you listening. Thank you.
Thank you.